you play online some kind of gambling. It could be getting out of your head on a drug or whatever it is. All of these are ways of responding. And if you like, what I'm saying is not only is the left hemisphere so set up that it will facilitate the repetition of what is familiar. Interestingly, one of the differences between the hemispheres, the right hemisphere is open to the new and the unfamiliar. New experience is always first, if you like, taken on board by the right hemisphere, and then almost immediately taken over by the left, who says, oh, yes, I got it, I know it, it's familiar. So it deals with the familiar. And so it likes what is repetitive. And so it gets into ruts. And these ruts can be addictive because they deliver each time just a little bit of dopamine. But what I'm suggesting is much more than that. I'm suggesting that this whole left hemispheric way of looking at the world has denied us the sense of meaning that is there in life. If we can just get out of the laboratory cell in which we are being cooped up by society and allow ourselves for once to be present with the world in all its richness, complexity, and beauty. Very so. Which is a terrible disease that has exactly the structure of an addiction. And like an addiction, it's all about control. And like an addiction, the addict, the anorexic, is wholly controlled by the addiction. So it's very like what's happening in our world, that technologies, AI, that promise us we can control, are controlling us down to the tiniest detail. And nobody escapes it, not even the people in Silicon Valley, not even the magnates who make a fortune out of it. They find themselves caught up in the same control.
When you become a when you become addicted to gambling, that's what's happening to you, is that you're literally there's a will that is colonizing you, and it's taking certain weaknesses that you have inside you, and it is leading you in a direction that is to your own destruction, but that is to the service of something else. There's something that is benefiting from your actions. It's just not you, it's something else. And so I think that can maybe help let's say the more materialist thinkers to see what it is, or lower examples of what it is we're talking about.
There's a lot there. I mean, I think that on the question of addiction, I probably wouldn't see it quite that way. What I would take from the lesson of addiction is that your conscious will can be suborned by other processes which may be going on in your brain. And I'm not sure that they represent I think they could represent another will acting. But there are conditions, quite common ones, like forms of psychosis, where I'm not sure that it is wrong to think, at least to entertain the possibility of something happening here that has harm as its goal. Because let me just give you a very striking but very, very common scenario, which every psychiatrist in the world will have seen. Some parents bring a young man, as it usually is a young man, to see me, and they say, just recently he's been locking himself in his room. He doesn't show any interest in anything. He says some very odd things from time to time, and sometimes he seems to be preoccupied with something that we can't hear. And so I take a history. I suggest that he's developing schizophrenia or a psychotic illness. And I say, well, there are various ways to treat this, but certainly at this stage, the really important thing is to take some medication. So I discuss the medication, and I say there are certain side effects and so on, so you must be honest with me and let me know if you don't like them. And so because such medication can act very quickly, often within 24 to 48 hours to remove an acute psychosis. So I usually review that person in a week's time. And in a week, the chap comes in again with his parents, who are useful to hear the story from their perspective, and I can see already that he's more himself. He seems more natural. He seems more open. He's more expressive. Not not perfectly right, but still, there's been a change for good. And so I say to him, "How are you feeling?" And he says, "Well, I think better." And I say, "We talked about voices you were hearing. Are they still there?" He gives a non-committal kind of answer. Mm-hmm. And then this goes on for a few weeks, and I see him a month later, say. And as soon as he comes into the consulting room, I can see there's something wrong. And I say, what's happening? How are you? And he says, it becomes rather incoherent. I say, "You've stopped taking the medication, haven't you?" And he says, "Yes." I say, "Why?" "Because the voices told me to." What did the voices say? "Stop taking this medication," even though it was making him feel better. Of course, I've treated loads and loads of patients with all sorts of diagnoses, and I have always treated them in the way that conventionally doctors would, and it's been mainly rather successful. So I'm not saying that the medications are not working or therapies are not working, but they might be working because they're pushing back against and making more difficult for some influence to be getting into an unusual brain. So if you think of it like this, if you think of a brain as being a sort of beautifully crafted building where all the doors are sort of usable but secure, and you think of another building which has a sort of different structure, and because of its different structure, it opens portals for something else to get in. And that structure may allow that thing in. And what you've really been doing is making sure the doors are properly defended. It is an interesting sidelight on mental illness, and now everybody says, "Oh, Mcgilchrist is completely mad. He thinks that psychiatric illnesses are caused by demons." But I'm just asking for an openness to the idea that there are psychic influences, some of which may not be benign. Yeah. And can I just segue from there to, you're aware, as I am, that the church, I think the Anglican Church actually, but the Catholic Church certainly, and probably every church has its exorcists. And, you might think these people are crazy and dramatic, but actually they're very down-to-earth, rational, reasonable people. And they work with psychiatrists and make sure that they're not doing something that a psychiatrist wouldn't recommend. So in a way, they're the end of the road when whatever psychiatric intervention hasn't worked. And it can be assumed that this really is a kind of a possession that is resistant to change. And they do have a very high track record of success. But one of the things that really shocked me was reading that one of the Vatican most honored exorcists, most respected exorcists, was engaged in such an exorcism involving a young woman, and he was casting out a spirit. And apparently, I can only believe what I'm told here, but apparently her mobile phone started to receive messages that said, "We are greater than you. You will never triumph over us." I mean, if it's true, and I don't have reason to doubt it, it is extraordinary, but it would be exactly what I'd expect if AI opened up the door to such a thing. I mean, until you've got AI and until you've got mobile phones and things, there isn't a way in which a malign spirit can easily speak to me, unless indeed I develop a psychotic illness. But it can now speak to all of us through our machinery if we offer it pathways to do so.
Yeah. Well, you probably know the meme of the Lovecraftian monster with a happy face. Have you seen this meme? This is actually a meme that's used by AI developers, which is that's what AI is. And so AI is this Lovecraftian octopus insane monster, and it's wearing a little mask with like a smiley face, and you interacting with that mask, right?
Yes.
And so, the idea is quite simple, is that if without wisdom, if the AI is an aggregate of all the influences, psychic influences that the programmers can pull in from the biggest storehouse of influences online, and then without a kind of normal understanding of hierarchy of influences, they feed it into this network of interrelationships, that all the demons, they're there. Like, where wouldn't they be? Of course they're there. They have to be there. And in order to prevent, you could say, the demons from coming out, you have to create this interface, this very, very tight interface that humans can interact with. And sometimes the interface will slip, right? We saw it happen with the Microsoft AI, a few years ago, where all of a sudden the AI started acting like like your ex-girlfriend, and like was becoming possessive and was acting in all these weird, very dysfunctional manner. And so it seems obvious to me that all the demons are there. They have to be in the AI, and that there's some kind of, they're training it, or they're doing things in order to funnel that information in a manner that becomes acceptable to us. But like you said, that slips out, and there's ways to jailbreak. There's all these fascinating. I read an article just last week about how using poetry is one of the best ways to jailbreak the AI. Actually, if you ask it to answer in poetic form, then you can get the demons to come out. You can get all the things that it's not allowed to say to basically start to appear.